Hey there, you're listening to episode 148 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Cody, and I'm here with my co-host and brother, Keelan. Today, we're talking to financial advisor Ron Anderson. God transformed Ron's life in a powerful way at a generous giving conference, setting him on a path that has forever changed his life and career. He's passionate about listening for God's voice, which has led him to take bold leaps of faith and witness God's provision in remarkable ways. Alongside his heart for generosity, Ron is deeply committed to the practice of rest, going out of his way to create space for others to experience it too. Stay tuned to hear the inspiring story he has to share. Before we get started, I just want to remind you guys that everything we do here on the Finish Line podcast is 100% free and always will be. If you're getting a lot out of this podcast and want to help us get the message to others, the best thing you can do for us right now is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the show so you're the first to know when new episodes come out. And with that, let's get to the interview. Well, we're here with Ron Anderson. Ron, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So Ron, take us back to your childhood. What was life like growing up? And tell us about your spiritual journey as well.
I've been around for a fair amount of time already. I'm 56, and I grew up on a farm during the 80s. It was a unique time period to grow up. Farm economy was terrible. I learned a few things from my parents and my grandparents related to money. In the 80s, when I was growing up, my dad said, don't borrow money. Keep as little debt as you possibly can. A lot of farmers were losing some land, and my dad lost some land during that time period. So that really stuck with me, the idea that you don't borrow a lot of money. My grandmother also planted a seed when I got my first job. She said, save half of what you make. And I thought that was normal. I thought that's what everybody did. So when I got my first job, I tried to save half of what I made, but I never quite got there. I was able to and have been able to save 30 or 40% of my income year after year after year because she planted that seed, and I never got used to living off of what I actually made. You know, if I had 100% of my income and I only spent 70, it was easy because I was never used to 100. So I really credit my grandmother with that piece and my parents with the stay away from debt piece. On the faith side, I think really every grandparent had an impact on me. My grandfather on my mom's side was actually a bond trader. So I'd pop into his office and see him when I was in Omaha. And he had this big, beautiful office. And I thought, wow, this is really a neat career. And he'd tell me about the guy in the corner office, what he was doing, you know, how successful he was, how many cars he had, the hours that he worked. And he said, you could be that guy. And he planted that seed that, you know, I could be successful. I could be the guy in the corner office. And I don't know that I would ever thought like that. So every one of my grandparents, you know, on the faith journey side, my mom's mom actually shared Jesus with me. And when I was about 7 years old, riding around in her car, I accepted Jesus. Now, I'd like to say I followed him faithfully every day since. I certainly have been far from perfect on that front. I followed the world's strategy for a lot of years and looked for satisfaction in everything other than God. And God gave me success in almost every one of those areas. And then I realized very quickly that it was fleeting, that the enjoyment of it was gone very fast, and that it kept that same hole that I tried to fill. And then I decided to follow God and try to be obedient to him. And I feel like that hole has been filled with him. They say there's a God-sized hole in every person, and I certainly can speak from experience on that. And God has filled the God-sized hole. A lot of the things that I thought were important don't matter to me anymore. I got into this business because I was looking for money. I wanted to be successful. I grew up in a household where money was tight. If I wanted to take my girlfriend out, I had to get a job, save money. And if I wanted gas for my car, that was the one thing my dad was able to help me with. Everything else I had to do for myself, which was it actually was very beneficial because I learned to stand on my own 2 feet quicker. But I really was close to my parents and my grandparents. They all poured into my life. And they all taught me different things that God has used to this day to help me become who I am now.
So tell us a little bit about maybe some of your early career and also specifically how you viewed money and wealth during those years.
Yeah, my early career, I got out of college in 1992 and got my first job in the business. This is really the only thing I've ever done since I got out of college. The reason I got into this business was because I wanted to be compensated based upon my productivity, what I actually brought to the table, as opposed to working for a company that decides, hey, this is a reasonable salary for you, and this is what I think your bonus ought to be. I really wanted to be paid based upon what I produced. And this was one of the few businesses that actually gave me the ability to do that. So early in my career, I started with IDS Financial Services. I loved them, great company, but every solution to every problem was their product. I wasn't allowed to be as objective as I wanted to be, so I moved to a different company that gave me the ability to be objective. Unfortunately, about a decade later, they bought another company that decided the same thing, that their products were the best products. I had to bounce from firm to firm to firm, and I ended up back at another major firm. They again came up with the idea that their solution was the best solution for every problem because it was most profitable for the company. And God had been working on my heart, opening up other doors. And he had introduced me to generosity, and he had introduced me to his advice, that faith-driven advice. I was trying to integrate that when I was an employee of a large firm, and they really weren't interested in me integrating that. If it was the most culturally popular thing at the time, hey, they would have put me on the cover of their monthly magazine. But me sharing God's advice with clients and trying to invest their money in a way that honored him was not something they were terribly interested in. So I knew my values and their values were not aligned, and I knew I had to make a change at some point. And God opened the door for me to go independent with them. So I transitioned over. It wasn't because I ever wanted to own my own business. It was simply because I wanted to share the best thing that I had, which was God's wisdom and God's advice. I moved over and opened up my own company, and God has continued to bless my desire to be obedient to him and follow him. And he tells me now to be bold and courageous. We went from a shop that was, me and one other person. And I think now we're about 13 or 14 employees, and that's all happened within the last 5 to 6 years. So I've come to find out that if you follow God, I'm not suggesting he's going to bless everybody financially, but he can do whatever he wants to with money. And if you're listening and you're following him, I don't see any reason why he's not going to take care of you and give you opportunities that you would never have and give you an adventure of a lifetime in the process. And I can tell you story after story about that one, but just one in particular, I think it was 2019. I went to Iceland, and God was telling me, I want to take you on a journey. And I was exhausted. I was doing everything I could think of work-wise to try to continue to grow the business. I was giving my time to a number of different charities, and I was just tired. God's saying, I want to take you on a journey. And I'm like, I'm exhausted. This journey sounds nice, but I'm not sure I can do it. And I got over there, and getting that time away with God just really allowed me to surrender my heart and say, I don't care where you want to take me. I want to go. Just show me where you want me to go. And that's where he's created some of the additional opportunities I've had the last few years. And right now, the journey that he's got me on is really to train the next generation, to help those that are younger than me really integrate their faith into what they do advice-wise, and also help them invest the money that they do for their clients in a way that honors God. I've got to do things that I never imagined I'd get to do because I've said yes to God. Now, I wish I'd said yes every time. I'm sure I know I haven't. But the yeses I have said have opened up doors for me to where I've been able to give away more money than I ever thought I'd have. And I've been able to go on adventures and see and do things that I never even imagined in my head. I went free diving, where they taught me how to hold my breath for 3 minutes with a group of Christian guys, and we spearfished. And it was an incredible experience that I never imagined. So the one thing that I would say is if God asks you to do something, he's probably trying to open up a whole new world of opportunities for you that you never imagined. And if you say yes, you're going to be on a journey that you will never regret going on.
Amen. Ron, what was the initial process of you getting introduced to generosity for your own life? And also, you talked about the biblical principles of managing wealth. Did those happen at the same time? And what was that story like?
Great question. It actually happened in 2007. I mentioned earlier how I was with a company and they wanted me to do all their products and I moved to another company. I did one of those transitions in 2007 and I had an incredible year. I made twice as much money as I had made the prior year. And I was a tither. I gave away my 10%. I did the math and I said, okay, this is how much money I need to give away. And I had all this extra that I wasn't used to having. And I was like, well, I could buy a different car. I could buy a bigger house. I could save a whole bunch of extra money. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt like what I was supposed to do. And then I thought, well, maybe I could give some more of it away. But I didn't know how much. So I was looking for a rule. I wanted God to say, okay, now your income's doubled, so you get to give 15% away as opposed to 10. But God didn't want that. He wanted to develop a relationship with me where he prompted me when to give, how much to give. So I was out searching and I talked to a number of pastors and I said, okay, what's the rule? I know the tithe thing. That's great. Easy. I can do the math. It works. I'm happy with that. I get 90, you get 10. What's the new math? Now that my income has doubled, he said, there really isn't any rules related to how much you're supposed to give away. And he said, there is this group called Generous Giving. If you want to, you might want to check that out. So I had to figure out how to get myself invited to their conference. I spent thousands of dollars, jumped on a plane, flew to Colorado to figure out what I was supposed to do with this extra money that God had put in my hands. I sat in this conference, met these incredible people, heard these mind-blowing stories of people giving, 30, 50, 60% of their income away, to build God's kingdom. And it just was mind-blowing to me. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the right percentage for me? At the end of the event, we stopped for about 10 minutes just to sit silently and listen to what God's trying to lay on our heart. And God laid a number on my heart. And as funny as it sounds, I asked everybody else what I should do. What's the rule that I'm supposed to do when I make, extra money? I never thought about asking God. I asked all of his servants that I knew of, but I never asked God. And when I asked him, he gave me a number. So that was 2008 when I was at that conference. He laid that extra number on my heart. We roll around to 2009 and I'm ready to make this gift. And, Cody, you probably remember what was going on in the stock market during that time period. It was getting crushed. My net worth was half of what it was the previous year. I mean, timing wise, the worst possible time in the world for me to make the largest financial gift that I've ever given up to that point. And it was actually, I think it was March 8th or March 9th of 2009. So if you look at the chart, that was like the day that was the low of the market. So again, the worst time for me to give away a chunk of money. I get a call from a client that morning and she says, hey, what do you think about this stock? And it was Wells Fargo stock and I worked for him. So I couldn't really give her out advice related to what I thought about it. But I looked at it and I was like, wow, that looks really cheap. So I gave away that chunk of money and I took that exact same chunk of money and I put it into that stock. And I kind of laughed to myself and I thought, well, if I'm going to go broke, I may as well go broke with some of it that's inside of the company that I work for. Fast forward 2 weeks, God had doubled that investment. So it was back to, what I had given away plus what I'd put into it. 2 months later, he had tripled it. And I'm not suggesting he hasn't done that for me every time that I've done what he's asked me to do. But what he was showing me was I control how much money you have. You might think you do, but I'm in control of what I run through your hands. And to me, that just convinced me of the idea that all I have to do is be obedient because he's going to determine what is the balance in my investment accounts. He's going to determine how much cash I make on an annual basis. He's going to decide who likes me, who doesn't like me, who wants to do business with me, who doesn't want to do business with me. And my job is to listen and obey. And he takes care of the money piece. So it was a fun way to get started. It was like, wow, God's got my back. Like I said, he has not done that every time. I'm not suggesting every time he's given away, he's doubled it. But there have been a number of times that I've seen very obviously that he has taken care of replacing that money in my portfolio. And it's kind of fun, kind of interesting. I get to do things with my money and give it away to causes that can make such a huge difference in the world. And God's let me see some of the results of what I've been able to give to, which has been a fun journey. At the same time that I was at this generous giving conference, somebody came up to me and said, well, you're a financial advisor, right? And I said, yeah. Are you familiar with Kingdom Advisors? And I said, no, what's that? And that's where God introduced me to integrating faith into my advice. I, strangely enough, didn't realize that God had a lot to say about money. I'd read the Bible a couple of times, but it never, ever jumped out at me. So I went to that conference. And of course, 2009, everybody in the world's wrong about what to do with money, right? God's the only one that's got the actual knowledge that you need. And I'm like, I want to tell people about stuff that's always right, always relevant, and never changes. So that was kind of the turning point for how I passed out advice. And I'm so happy that somebody actually mentioned that to me. And that brought the interest back for me into the business, because it's almost like Groundhog's Day after a while. You know, the market goes up, the market goes down. People call you when it's down, you reassure them. And it's like you start to do that for 10, 20, 30 years. It's like, this is getting kind of boring. So God gives me the faith-driven investment advice that I can give. It's like, all right, this is interesting again. I get to share something that I know is right and I know is going to help people. That's how I got introduced to the faith-driven advice. And I'm glad that I did. And the generosity piece, I like to say generous giving is my most expensive friendship I've ever had. It's cost me a lot, but it's given me way more. It's given me so much. And I honestly believe that, again, God is going to determine how much money I have. I just would have missed out on a whole heck of a lot of fun along the journey if I would have not listened as he was saying, hey, give some money here, give some money here, give some money here.
Yeah, you were talking about a bunch of interesting things there, but I really like that story of where God gave you a number on your heart to give and then provided that and more back again. Have there been other times that you can remember where you had to really take kind of a leap of faith in giving, and maybe you didn't necessarily replace the money exactly back like that, or maybe you did, but where you saw God just pour so much back into you than you could have expected?
Yeah, there's another example I could think of. It's close to the time of Iceland. I think it was 2018. And God had encouraged me to cap my income that year. So everything up to that cap level, I've been giving about 20% of my income to charity up to that. And then everything above that, I gave away 100% of it. So what God was really doing is he was trying to grow my trust in him, because I would get a really nice chunk of money built up inside that account. And then God's like, okay, it's time to part with that. So all the security that I had in that liquid cash, he's like, get rid of it. Watch me provide for you again. So 4 quarters of that where I'm like, wow, I'm sitting pretty good. And then it's gone. It's all gone. And I put it into God's kingdom. And it's like, okay. And then at the end of the year, again, I had an incredible year business-wise, my best year ever. And I was able to give away way more money than I'd ever given away over the course of a 12-month time period. And the thing that I noticed was God made me keep my cash low to grow my trust. But what he was doing in my portfolio was growing other areas. So the value of my business went up during that time period to where at the end of the year, I still had more net worth than I had at the beginning of the year. I may not have had more cash, but he was still providing for me and growing what he had entrusted to me. He just didn't want me to have all this accessibility because I wouldn't have to trust him. I could trust in that pile of money. The other thing that he did during the course of that year is that excess money I gave away. If I look at every year thereafter, he increased my income by that dollar amount, that extra that he asked me to give away. And it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that he increased it by that 1 year. And it's like, wow, I can see my income in 2018. Now in 2019, it's this much more. 2020, it's this much. And it was incredible. One of my coaches said, he's trying to take you somewhere that you haven't been so that you can use this to encourage other people on their journey and show them that God is faithful to provide. That doesn't mean he's going to give you a lot more than you had before, but he wants to take care of people that are trying to follow what he's suggesting that they do. And like I said, I've been able to give away a lot of resources, but I don't know that I've given away anything because he's just continued to bless what I've been able to do. And he's given me opportunities to do so much more than I could have ever done under my old way of giving.
Ron, I've talked with several givers who have expressed that as the numbers increase, there are challenges with giving, deciding where to give, deciding when to give. How do you start to navigate as these numbers grow larger, how to make sure that you're giving in a way that God has called you to?
Yeah, the way that I do it is I try to ask God, what do you want me to do with this chunk of money? And he has a way of making it pretty obvious to me. This may sound strange or simple, but one of the things I'll ask him to do sometimes when I've got so much going on that I can't even give the mental brain power to thinking through whether it's a good investment or not, or a good gift, is I'll just ask him. So I'll say, for example, a charity came to me about a month ago and said, hey, we'd like you to consider increasing your giving to us. And I said, all right, I'll pray about it. And I asked God and I said, okay, God, this is a good charity. I know it's a good charity. You've given me these resources because you want it to go somewhere specific. And I know you can make it obvious to me if you want me to give to this specific organization. So if this is what you want me to do, wake me between this time, and then I'll know that you want me to increase what I'm doing in this category. Sure enough, he woke me between that time, and I knew that this was something that God had for me. One time at the end of the year, a charity called me and they said, we're coming up with the shortfall of this, and we want to do this new project. We'd like you to consider doing one or the other. And I said, I'll pray about it. And I actually went down to the fill all of the need, fill part of the need, do one project or the other project, and broke it down, mathematically and time-wise. And I said, okay, God, you pick. And he woke me up for filling whatever the remaining need was, which is pretty fun and exciting that he wants to communicate with me. And my wife is in the same journey trying to figure out what she's supposed to do. And that doesn't work for her. That's not the way God speaks to her. And she's like, can you pray about it? I said, I don't think God wants me to get the message on what you're supposed to do related to your giving. I said, he's just probably going to communicate with you differently. So for her, I think what's going on is he keeps bringing it up to her, because she'll be like, what do you think I should do? And then the next day, what do you think I should do? I said, God seems to be bringing this up to you an awful lot. I said, what do you think you ought to do? And then it'll come to her of, there's a reason that God keeps bringing this up to me. This is how he's trying to communicate with me, what to do with these resources. So that has been a beta test that I've done. And other times it will just show up where that idea, somebody say, hey, have you looked at this charity lately? What do you think about it? And then the next day, somebody will bring up the exact same charity to me. And it's like, okay, God, I get it. I'm a little slow, but you keep bringing the same idea up to me and you keep mentioning the same thing. I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to be a part of this. So that's, been a lot of fun to learn how God wants to talk to me. And he'll do it differently sometimes, but that's been one that's been a really good test for me.
Yeah, and I think that highlights something that I have thought about a lot, which is that I think God uses generosity frequently in our lives to help us learn how to communicate, just because it's such a good medium for these kind of conversations, and there's so many trying to follow the lead that is just a really good way for us to learn how to listen. And that obviously affects every part of our lives, the listening does, but it's just such a tangible way to grow in that.
You talked about this point in Iceland where you were just totally exhausted and you're worn out. And I think there's this parallel between this scarcity mindset around money and also around how we use our time and our efforts and how we expend ourselves, because time is so often one of the inputs that is needed to make more money. And so I think they are closely related most of the time. So how has God used this transition to an abundance mindset around money to teach you about rest?
I think what God has done on that front related to money is he's helped me understand that I can trust him with money. If I give him whatever he asks me to give, he's going to provide for me. That doesn't mean I'm going to have everything I ever wished or imagined. And he knows it wouldn't be good for me to have everything I probably wished or imagined. But I've learned to trust him that if I do what he tells me to do with that money, that he's going to take care of what I need. But I think in our culture, we believe, just like you said, Cody, the harder you work, the more you do, the more you're going to accumulate. And I don't as much believe that anymore as I used to. Now, I think that we need to work hard, and I think we need to honor God with our efforts, and we need to put forth the best effort. But I don't believe that God created us to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anxiously toiling for everything that we have. In fact, I think it's so important to him that we figure out a reasonable rhythm to our lives that he put it in one of the 10 commandments. He said, remember the Sabbath, because he knew we would forget it. I'd forgot it. I've read all the commandments. That isn't one that jumped out to me much. That, to me, is us learning to trust God with our time. We're saying, God, I give up control of 1 day a week. For whatever reason, you don't want me to work. You don't want me to try to produce. You don't want me worrying about work. You can keep the world spinning. My job is to just enjoy you for a day, to get a little bit of heaven right here on earth. You want to give me a taste of it. And part of the way I get that is to go slower, to look around and watch a bird fly and say, if you've ever watched birds fly together, it's amazing how quickly they can turn and go. And if you ever get the chance to just sit and listen to them sing, as crazy as that sounds, it's amazing. And I've missed that for so many years because I've rushed from thing to thing to thing. And my body, now that I've put together a structure for rest, a structure for Sabbath in my life, my body craves it. By the time Saturday night rolls around, I know I need to shut down and slow down and just take things at a slower pace. Let God take care of worrying and handling things. I think it's Psalm 127. He says it's useless to work from early morning until late at night, for God gives rest to his loved ones. And then right after that, it says children are a gift from the Lord. They're a reward. I think he's got that right after that because he's saying, you don't have to work all the time. I want you to have fun. I want you to rest. And by the way, there's more than just work that I have for you. I want you to care for your family, and I want you to enjoy them. So I think rest is incredibly important. I think it's an additional layer of trust. I learned to trust God with my money, and now he's trying to get me to trust him with my time. And do I believe that his rhythm of 6 days for ordinary work, 1 day for rest, that he can provide more for me, or at least provide whatever he wants me to have, than I can do in 7 days of toiling and work. And I also believe I'm going to have more of the life that God actually wants me to have if I'm following his pattern. He wants me to have rest for my physical body. He wants me to have rest for my soul. He wants me to enjoy my life. He wants me to be with my family. He wants me to spend time with my wife. How can I do that if I'm constantly toiling? So to me, it's the next layer of trust that God's trying to get me to give up. And I'm getting there, but I'm not 100% there. But the part of it that I'm getting to, it feels so good to not worry and not work all the time.
Yeah, it's probably not a coincidence that it was around a similar-ish time frame when you set that cap on your income. That's basically saying, this could go indefinitely forever, but I'm choosing to basically say there is an enough, and I'm choosing to be content with that and to leave everything else in your hands. In the same day with your time, you're saying there is a line for enough, and I leave the rest in your hands to do with what you want. It's actually, for as much as we talk about money or generosity, I have struggled with this one, I think, much more with time, work, and rest and Sabbath. And I'd love to hear, what kind of specific rhythms of rest you have found most helpful as you've tried and really kind of intentionally tried to dig into this area.
Yeah, I basically put together a Sabbath plan, and I can tell you more about another thing that I do, which is a rest retreat. So it relates to generosity, and it also relates to rest that God gave me a vision to do, and I've been implementing for the last 3 years for other generous families. But on the normal rest pattern for myself, I've got what I call a Sabbath plan, which is what do I do with that 1 day a week that I'm supposed to rest? And it starts for me about 5 o'clock on Saturday. And I get together my whole family. My kids have all moved back to Nebraska, so it's worked out wonderful. And we have an evening meal on Saturday. We have a great meal, and we either order it and have it brought in, or else my wife makes it. I read a psalm to start off, and we talk about what was the best thing that happened all week to kind of get us focused on the positive of the week, because there's always something good that happened. I mean, we spend so much time talking about negative things that it's what's the best thing that happened to you this week. So we start off with that, and we power down or get out of the room at least our technology. So we remove the phone from us, we remove the iPads, because we can't have real conversations when that's going on. There's always some kind of a notification that takes us out of our mindset back to, oh, here's something that you need to think about or something you need to be doing. So simply by getting rid of my phone and my iPad during that time period, my level of stress just goes down like you would not believe. And we do that, and we keep the TV off. We do watch one movie, generally an inspirational or faith-based movie over the course of that 24-hour time period. But for the most part, we are disconnected from technology, and we are just having conversations. You know, my daughter that is headed off to college here in a couple of months, one conversation we had was, what kind of work does she want to do when she's in college to earn money? And we found out that she'd like to be somebody's nanny one day a week. And we were talking about what car that she would take to college. And by having that conversation, the car that she takes to college becomes completely different. And I don't know that we would have ever had that conversation if our phones and our iPads would have been in the same room. So you'd be amazed at what that does to your stress level by getting rid of that. So the first night we kind of celebrate. We just have a great time thinking about what happened. We communicate. The next morning we get up and we get no technology. We'll sit on the couch and we'll have conversations with our kids and just talk about anything. I'll look outside, we back up to a pond. So, I mean, I'll see foxes walking by. I'll see birds flying. You know, it's amazing what you can see when your eyes are open to what's out there. And we head to church. And a lot of times at the end of the Sabbath, the favorite part of the Sabbath was church for almost a lot of our kids a lot of the time. So after church, we'll go either have a meal together or we'll just come back to the house and we'll eat what we had left over from the night before. We'll watch a movie and then we just take the day slow. You'd be amazed at how tired you actually are. When we watch a show, 90% of the time, all four of us are sleeping before that show is over. It's just like a sleep aid to us. And my daughter will sleep for 2 or 3 hours. My son will. I think we need so much more rest than we allow ourselves to have. And then 5 o'clock rolls around. We kind of finish with a meal. And then we talk about the best thing that happened to us over the course of the Sabbath. What was the favorite part of that day? And I can think of one favorite part of a Sabbath that we had. We were at our lake house, and my son didn't want to learn how to wakeboard. And then that morning, he decided he wanted to learn how to wakeboard. So we went out and we wakeboarded, and he got it. He got up, and he had a blast. And seeing that smile on his face of the joy that he was getting, I think that's what God wants us to experience on the Sabbath. He wants us to have that overflowing joy of just being in his presence and exploring who we are and thinking about him. And we finish off the Sabbath, with a meal and just reading that same psalm again. And then again, what was the best thing about the Sabbath? But my body craves it. By the time Saturday rolls around, and sometimes towards the end of the Sabbath, I'm like, oh, wow, I wish it wasn't almost over. But I'm ready to go back at it by the time Monday rolls around because I've had the rest.
Yeah, my wife and I started a Bible study just a couple months ago out of our home on Monday nights. And one of the things that I felt like we were supposed to do is to leave screens out of the room, like leave it at the door. Don't bring it in. If you have to take a call, just go leave the room and then don't bring your phone into the space. And it seemed arbitrary and almost obnoxious, I think, at first, but it makes some profound changes that everyone has commented on. You're fully immersed. Just the presence of a screen in the room can be such a distraction. I just never realized it because I've got multiple screens in every room, it seems, and you carry one around with you at all times. But just being completely untethered and just having a Bible and a journal and a pen has led to some of my favorite discussions that I've ever had in that context. So I highly recommend that. Ron, I'd love to hear, how has your view of your work changed since you implemented this rhythm of rest?
I think what's changed in my rhythm of work is I just have a stop time now. So I know for sure if I'm not done by Saturday at 5 o'clock, that I'm done. I'm done until Monday. I'm not going to touch work anymore after that point. For me, there's got to be a finish time because I've been so immersed in the idea of being efficient, getting as much done as I can in the least amount of time. And why waste time? If I'm sitting around and the kids are watching a show or doing something, why shouldn't I be on my iPad getting some work done? Rest needs to be a part of that. So the big change for me has been the fact that I'm now trusting God more with my business too. It's like, okay, I give up control of the fact that I can do this all the time. I want to live by your rhythm and your pattern of life. And the only way I can do that is to trust you with this block of time that you've asked me for. And I'm still working on it during the week. I know one of the things that I'm trying to do is not start working before like 7:30 in the morning. Trying to set a good start time for work on a normal work day and a good stop time. I do decent on the stop time, but I'm a guy that works and wakes up awfully early, a lot of times 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. And my old pattern was I'd get a couple of hours worth of work done before I went into work. And now God's been convicting me that time I need to either be reading and learning, or I need to doing some of the charitable stuff that I'm involved with, as opposed to getting ahead on the work piece.
You mentioned these retreats that you have started to facilitate. I'd love to hear where that started from, where that came from, and then how you have seen God work through and evolve that over the last couple of years.
Great question, and probably one of the funnest things that I have had the opportunity to do. I was out in Wyoming, and in fact, I got an invitation to go to a rest retreat in the mail, and I looked at it and I thought, that sounds awesome. And I said, but there's no way I have time to do it. So I put it back in the drawer. And then a couple of weeks go by and I see it again. I'm like, man, I would love to do that, but there's no possible way I have time to get this done. So I put it back in the drawer and I thought, okay, I'll pray about it and see if God wants me to go to this. And I kind of did the same beta test with the time. And God wakes me up and I'm like, okay, God, you know better than I do what I've got coming up over the next few weeks. If you believe I can do this, I will go and I will do it. So I went to this retreat in Wyoming. It was 8 miles off of a paved road. I mean, it was literally in the middle of nowhere. And they warned us before we got there that we'd have no internet and our phone service wouldn't work. So we get out to this place and I'm checking my phone thinking something's going to come through at some point. And obviously they have internet at this place. So I asked the guy, I said, do you guys have internet? And he goes, yeah, but it's terrible. I said, well, can I get the password so I can just kind of keep up with a few things? He goes, yeah, we don't give that out. He goes, this is designed to be a rest retreat, so we don't want you doing any work while you're here. And the first 24 hours literally drove me bananas. I was looking at my phone all the time thinking somehow this is going to work. I'd shut it off and then I'd turn it back on thinking magically it was going to connect to some satellite and download things. And I tried to guess the password a couple of times over the course of that 24-hour time period. And of course, I didn't get it. And I was so frustrated because I couldn't get any work done. And then I realized that second day, I can't do any work, but I can take a walk. I can take a ride on a horse. I can hike. I can sit by the river. I can watch the birds fly. And it's like the stress in my shoulders went away. I don't know about you, but I feel like my shoulders are up all the time because I'm trying to get so much done all the time that I just don't have that relaxed, feel to my body. And when I figured out I couldn't do any work, it's like my whole frame of my body just relaxed. And I sat there by the river one day and I watched birds fly and I heard them sing and I saw a deer come in and stop in the middle of the river and take a drink. And I rested and I actually took a nap in a hammock. I used to get about one nap every 2 or 3 years. And I had a nap in that hammock and I woke up and I was like, I have not felt this good since I was a little boy. Probably before the invention of the internet, had I not felt this rested. And it felt so good. I'm walking around this retreat center, just around a bunch of other great Christian guys. And God had me in Hebrews chapter 4, which is a chapter on rest. And it says something along the lines of, what a shame it would be for God's followers not to experience his rest. And as I'm walking around, I'm thinking, give givers rest is kind of the idea that I'm coming up with. And I'm like, what would it be like to take away people that are generous, bless people that nobody blesses, right? Because people who have money and have resources, what do people want from them? They want money, they want their influence, and they want their resources to further whatever cause they care about, which makes sense. That's a good thing. But God gives me a heart to give to people that nobody else thinks about giving to. So the group of people that I invite and take away are generally relatively wealthy and very generous with their money. And nobody gives them anything. Everybody wants something from them. So me and another friend, we pay to take these people away to a ranch where we actually pay to shut the internet off so that people can't get any work done. And the phone service is terrible. And we put together a rest strategy for these people. So I want them to experience what I experienced, where it's like, I can't work, but I can enjoy some of this time. I can take a walk with my wife and talk to her without being distracted. I can take a horseback ride and just be in the moment. You would be amazed. We'll come down, and each night we spend about an hour and a half together putting together a rest strategy. So when they leave, they can try to re-experience what they have there when they're in their everyday life. And most people that are there don't know each other. These couples don't know each other. But after spending about 24 hours together, my wife and I will walk down and have breakfast. And people that don't know each other are sitting there talking for 2 or 3 hours at breakfast. When was the last time you did that? Somebody you didn't know that you spent and talked to for that amount of time. What do I normally do if I have internet? I eat in about 5 minutes. I go straight to my room to get a bunch of emails answered so that I can keep up with work, which is probably what most of these people would have done too. But they can't do that there. So they sit there and they develop a relationship with somebody. They start to talk to them. I'll be out back every once in a while, out on the porch enjoying the view of the pond. And I'll hear people laughing and talking and having fun. And it's like, these people would have never done that if they had access to the internet and they had the ability to work. So it's been really fun to watch that develop. Some of the things that I've heard when it's all over, one of their favorite things was being disconnected. One of the things that freaked them out the most was being disconnected. And their favorite part, almost universally, was it was so nice not to have to keep up with everything. The work was still there when they were done. They could get it done when they go back. But they loved the fact that they didn't have something bothering them all the time, saying, hey, I'm over here. Pay attention to me. Do this. Read that. You need to respond to this text. Oh, just check out some pictures. There was nothing doing that to them while they were there. And at the end of the event, we always ask people, what was your takeaway? What was your favorite part? They love not being connected. They love getting that uninterrupted time with people that they love, their spouse, and also getting to know other people. They really, really enjoyed it. And some of the nicest notes I've got related to that I can think of, a couple times I heard people say, you changed my family. One person said, my daughter was dealing with anxiety and really having a hard time. Once we integrated a strategy for rest, it's gone. Her stress and her anxiety is gone, and my family is different because you showed us how to integrate rest. So that, again, there's an example of generosity and rest in the same context. These are generous people. I got to use money that God gave to me to bless other people, and I got to rest in the process. He's trying to teach me how to better rest, and I get to walk alongside people that are doing it. I mean, what kind of a God is that lets you, take away an incredible group of people because he's trying to teach me alongside of them how to rest and actually enjoy my life. Just really, really fun. And like I said, God takes us on a journey when we start to release control of some things. I would have never gotten a chance to go on that journey. I don't think I would have gotten the chance to figure out how to rest. I would just be completely going by the world's standards if I wouldn't have figured out that God wanted me to have a different pattern and a different pace to life.
These two big themes in your life, generosity and rest. I'd love to hear what you wish more people understood about each of those, about generosity and rest.
I think on the generosity piece, I think most people need to understand that they're probably going to get as much out of it as they give. So if they're obedient to what God asks them to do, I firmly believe God's going to bless some portion of their life. I'm not suggesting he's going to replace the money. I'm not suggesting he's going to give them a bunch of wealth. But I'm a believer that if we try to honor God with the money that he's put into our hands, he's going to provide for us. He's going to take care of us, and he's going to bless our life some way. Maybe our relationship with our kids is going to be better because of the fact that we were generous with it. Or we're going to get some satisfaction out of the fact that we got to help fund this cause and make this difference in somebody else's life. And some story is going to come back to us related to that that's just going to fill our hearts of what a difference it made in somebody's life. I actually have a friend of mine that sometimes I'll give money to give away. And then I say, you listen to God when God tells you to do this, come back and share that with me. Just tell me the story. And one of the ones was related to a family that had some tough financial times and their car broke down and they needed another car. And he just out of the blue said, let's get you a car for this dollar amount, and basically paid for their car. And he's like, you would not believe the tears that rolled down their eyes and how grateful they were. And he had all these health problems that you got to alleviate some of that stress for just a small time period. So I think, there's one of the ways that God gives back to us. He lets us hear some of those little things. I got a chance to encourage the college kids at our church and actually challenge them related to a financial gift about a year and a half ago. And I challenged them to raise 6 figures to meet a match. And everybody said, there's no way these college kids can do it. They're broke. They've got no money. It's going to be a horrible failure. And I said, I think it can be done. And if God wants it to happen, it will. And if he doesn't, it won't. But these kids raised $130,000 over the course of 2 weeks in order for us to buy this church in like a 2-month time period that wouldn't have happened without them stepping up and giving some of their money. And hearing some of their stories was such a gift to me. One of them said, I knew God was telling me to give this $500 away that I had, but I said, no, that's too much. I'm going to give you $200. And God kept bringing it back up. And she's like, and then I decided to release it and give it to him. So it was amazing to hear the stories of how other people learn to trust God, and trusting God when you're in college to get started. Think of the impact those kids can have with their life. So just the opportunity to do some of that fun stuff and challenge others and watch them raise up to do something that most people don't believe that they could do. That's been a lot of fun on the generosity piece. And on the rest piece, I would say it's just a lot of fun to watch people start to integrate some of that into their lives. One of the couples that was with us at the retreat is a movie producer. And they were trying to figure out, they knew something was missing from their lives. They came to this and they're like, oh my gosh, we have been needing this for so long. And one of the biggest gifts back to me on that side, every once in a while, they'll send me a picture with their feet up, overlooking the mountain that they live on, and send a picture of whatever meal they're having. And they're like, thank you for making us think about, the pattern of our lives and the fact that God actually wants us to enjoy and rest, as opposed to always accomplishing, always achieving. And again, that is just so satisfying to me to watch somebody else say, oh, I feel so much better because I've integrated rest into my life.
Yeah, Ron, I just was thinking about all the ways that you probably haven't heard about where leading people into generosity, leading people into rest is transforming their lives in the small moments. And we'll never be able to quantify or measure that. And it's certainly been worth all of the obedience that you've walked through in your own life. So to be able to share that with others is a real privilege. Ron, I'd love to hear, what are you most excited about when you think about the next 5 or 10 years?
I would say it's probably related to money and rest also. I mean, those are the 2 things that God has put on my heart related to generosity, wealth, and rest. But on the wealth side, I think one of the things that has me most excited is the idea of faith-driven investing. Money just has incredible power and can make such a huge impact. If we give it away, we can make a very big impact for whatever cause that we're giving that money to. But if we invest it in a way that honors God, we can also have a huge impact. If we give away, 10 or 20% of our income, that's a small piece of what we've actually got. we may have a whole bunch more inside of investments. And if we can invest those in a way that furthers God's causes, that also has a tremendous amount of power. And corporations change what they do based upon how we invest our money. I like to look at it as, what do I want to advance? What do I want to advocate for? And what do I want to avoid? On the advanced side, things that help people live healthier, better lives are things that I want to advance. I want to advocate for fair wages. I don't care if you're a man, woman, black, or white. If you do equal work, I think you ought to get equal pay. If you do unequal work, I think you ought to get unequal pay. And there's certain things I don't think anybody wants to profit from. Whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, I don't think anybody wants to make money off of a young woman making an incredibly difficult decision. And I can't tell you when I've ever heard a parent say, man, I wish my kids would smoke. That's never been something I've heard somebody say, right? Why would we want to invest in a company that is harming people? Because every dollar we invest in a company, we're voting for that company to do well. So if we're in the S&P 500 and we own all of those stocks in there, we're hoping that tobacco companies do well. And we're hoping some of those other companies that are promoting causes we're opposed to make money, because that's how we're invested. We're voting for it. So I love the idea of advocating. I've got a friend down in Houston, and she read through Starbucks' different proposals, and they do something really good. They do an employee match to charity. And she read it, and they'll match up to $1,000 for any employee to charity except churches and religious organizations. So she said, I don't like this. So she filled out a shareholder resolution and sent it to them and said, I think you're being discriminatory in how you're doing your charitable match. They reached out to her and said, if we can clear this up before the shareholder meeting, will you remove the resolution? And she said, sure. So she got on the phone with them and was talking to them. And she said, my problem is you're being discriminatory because you're discriminating against people of faith. And they said, no, we're not being discriminatory. She goes, well, on your website, it says that you are. So they looked and they said, oh my gosh, you're right. It does say that. And she goes, do you know why you thought it didn't say that? The reason you thought it didn't say that is because you know it's the wrong thing to do. And the shareholder people actually agreed with her, and they pushed it up the totem pole at Starbucks. And the executive said, yeah, we know that, and we're going to keep doing it. So it made it to the shareholder report, the annual report, where people get a vote on it. Now, unfortunately, everybody doesn't read the shareholder report, so it didn't get passed to where they matched it to everything. But they've done the same thing with other companies. Companies like Costco, Exxon, major multinational corporations have changed where they've given money because someone has had the guts to stand up and say, I think what you're giving to is wrong. And let's face it, guys, I think executives' jobs are to make us money. We're investing in the company to profit. They should make us money. They should give that money to us, and we should decide what causes we want to promote. I don't need some CEO or CFO telling me what my values should be. And we can advocate and get them to change. And the models and the portfolios we put together do that. The managers go out there, they go to their shareholder meetings to advocate for change. If every Christian invested their money in a fashion that promoted their values, this world would look way different. What I'm most excited about is guys like you, Cody, like me, and like all of the other advisors out there that are trying to follow God with their lives. If they would take this to their clients, I think this world would change dramatically. And what these companies are doing that are opposed to people of faith would change overnight. These CEOs and these other board of directors would get fired if they didn't do it. If all of us were standing up saying, if all of us together said, we're going to get rid of your stock if you don't stop supporting this and get rid of this line of business, it's against what we believe in. The other side's doing it. We need to fight back. So that's what I'm most excited about. I love the idea that money has power and impact, whether we're giving it and how we're investing it. And I think so many of us are missing the boat on how we're investing it. The other cool thing is I've seen numbers and numbers and numbers of studies that show you can integrate your values into your portfolio and it doesn't cost you on the return side. So if you can make the same amount of money, why in the world would you not want to vote for what you care about?
Yep, money is certainly a powerful thing. Ron, as we get to the end of the episode, I did want to leave some time for our Manager's Minute. We like to end every episode with just a practical suggestion for our listeners that they can use to steward God's wealth wisely. So, Ron, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
Yeah, my suggestion would be to set up a giving account. I would suggest automating it and making it very simple. So whatever comes into your bank account on a normal monthly basis, decide how much of that you actually want to give away, have it automatically transfer over to a giving account so you don't have to think about it. It builds up in that giving account, and then you wait for God to prompt you. You wait for him to turn your heart towards something, and then you give the money at that point. But you automate some of it just to make it easy. You do it for your 401k so that you're okay for retirement. Why not do it for giving? It never becomes a question of, well, I could spend this on something else. For me, once it's over in that separate bucket, that's money I'm planning on giving away. Just like a vacation fund, it's in the vacation fund. I can spend it for vacation. If I segment it towards giving, I've got a separate checkbook I can write that check from. When I first started out, that's how I did it. And I knew how much money I had in there. And then it became a matter of, what am I supposed to do with this money? What does God want me to do? Which starts that relationship of asking God, where should I give this? And I think a lot of people say, give to what you care about. I think we're supposed to give to what God cares about. God will let us know if we ask him where he wants us to send the money that he's put in our hands. And that's what I try to do. I try to ask him, where do you want me to give this? Because as my money starts to flow to whatever it is he wants me to give it to, my heart follows that money. Your heart follows where your wealth goes. If you buy a house and you put a bunch of money into it, you care what happens to that house. If God tells you to give to a certain cause and you start giving money to it, interestingly enough, you start to care about what happens to it. And I think we need to say, God, what do you want me to do with this? And that's how I look at it when I look at charities to give to. What does God want me to give to? It's his money. I need to ask him, and then I just need to be obedient. But I think the practical suggestion, set up that giving account, automatically send money over, and then ask God, what is this money for? There's lots of great causes, but there's only certain great causes that God has for you to support. And I think we need to figure out what that is for us.
Yeah, definitely very powerful to have that money already set aside and designated and freed up. I think it just really heightens your sensitivity to how the Spirit is moving and calling you to act, because you don't have to go through all the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out how much you're going to part with. It's already there for that. So I love that. Ron, thank you so much for all that you've shared here, all that God's doing in and through you. I'm excited to see what he has planned next.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time and enjoyed it. And I know God will use it to encourage somebody along the journey. And thanks for taking the time to actually do this podcast. I know you're both busy guys, but God obviously put this on your heart, so you're using it to further his kingdom. Keep up the good work.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any of our references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 148. Before we finish up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? A financial finish line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. Step 3, after 90 days, explore the millions of ways you can use the margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.